Hello YouTube. Let's talk about Moscow. Moscow, the capital of Russia, has many secrets and enigmas in its very colorful history, including one very unusual river. Of course, Moscow's paranormal secrets are often intertwined with its occasionally mysterious and classified history. So don't look for the Neglina or Neglinka, as the people refer to it, river on the map. It seems to be there, and at the same time it is not there. For almost 200 years, the river, which carries its waters from the north of the capital to the south, has been enclosed in an underground collector pipe. Its history is the history of Moscow, concealing many secrets and riddles. Long before the appearance of Russian capital, the Slavic tribes of Vyatichi and Krivichi settled in these places. They were pagans, and on the site of the Borovitsky hill, where the Kremlin now rises, they built a temple, a pagan temple under the open sky, and it had stone idols. Here, not only animals were sacrificed to the pagan gods, it is said that the combatants of Prince Yuri Dolgorukov found on the hill the charred bones of hundreds of burned people and heads impaled on stakes. All this, by the order of the prince, was buried in the ground along with the fallen idols. Gradually, the small town of Moscow was formed at the mouth of the Neglina River, with a fortified center on Borovitsky Hill, and a craft and trade settlement. The Neglinka, which rolled its bright streams among the dense forest and flowed into the Moscow River for many years, supplied the townspeople with crayfish and whitefish. Blacksmith and pottery workshops were working on its banks. The wings of mills were spinning merrily. Moscow was being built and expanded. And now the time has come for the Grand Duke Ivan III, who planned to build a stone cathedral in the Moscow Kremlin that is more majestic than in Vladimir. Russian master masons could not build such a cathedral. Several times they took up the case, but the walls fell apart. Foreign architects were called to help, but only one responded: the famous architect from Bologna, Aristotle Fioravanti. In his person, Ivan III received not only an excellent builder, but also an engineer, fortifier, mechanic, caster, and gunner. Of course, it was rumored that Fioravanti was also an alchemist, who possessed the secret knowledge of the defeated Templar order. In any case, when Aristotle examined the walls of the unfinished temple in April 1475, he decided to demolish them and dig a deep moat. And why? Ivan III ordered everybody not to contradict him in anything. As soon as the working people went deep into the ground for the distance of 2 arshin, 1.5 meters, the spades hit something hard. Huge stone idols and bones, many bones, were extracted from the depths. That's what prevented the construction of an Orthodox Christian church. The Grand Duke ordered Fioravanti to suspend the work and split the stone idols to pieces under the cover of the night, and then throw their fragments along with the remains of the victims into the Neglinka. So the crystal clear waters of the river took in all this and began to accumulate the black energy of evil, as people said. Over time, in order to keep the riverbanks from landslides, they began to build wooden crates filled with earth, soil. They were called vzrub or zarub in Russian. Some of them had only 3 walls, one of which was facing Neglina River and formed part of the lining of the shore. However, all this could no longer save the once clean river from pollution and the concentration of negative energy. The refined and bloody 18th century in Russia made its contribution to the transformation of Neglinka into a terrible place. Well, fashion for building mansions along the banks of the river began with Count Ivan Vorontsov. He built 6 stone houses at once. Soon the mansions of the Bibikovs, Babarykins, Buryatsky princes, Count Baturlin, Volinsky, and the Golitsyn princes joined Vorontsov houses. And this is how a great Russian connoisseur of Moscow's history, Mikhail Pelayev, described the century of Catherine the Great. That's how he called it. Moscow at that time was a magnificent city where, like majestic ghosts, there were all those who were once in power and all those who were in disgrace and considered themselves bypassed on the well-known ladder of honors. All these decorated ghosts of former greatness swayed in their staterooms or moved in 8 glass golden carriages drawn by 8 horses under the weight of shiny uniforms with ribbons with diamond keys. Each mansion had 2 courtyards. The so-called cour d'honneur in French, with my pronunciation, is cour d'honneur, or court of honor, in front of the palace and the backyard, which included barns, sheds, cellars, baths, workshops, cooks, and stables. That's how the exploiters and aristocratic parasites destroyed the ecology of the Third Rome, as some Russians called their capital. But that was not all. All the sewage, garbage, and manure from the backyards flowed in abundance into the once cleanest waters of the river. In addition, among the Moscow nobility who settled on the banks of the Neglinka, there was a sinister person who continued pagan rituals in these places. It turned out to be the landowner, Daria Saltykova, better known in Russian history by the nickname Saltychicha, who tortured more than 100 of her serf maids. It is said that in the summer, accompanied by a faithful servant, she came to the shore every night and, whispering spells, washed herself with water in the hope of getting beauty and maintaining eternal youth. After this ritual, the servant, on the orders of Saltychicha, burned a towel on the fire with which she wiped her face and threw the ashes into the water. And although this freak of the human race, as Katherine II called the landowner, although she was punished, her mystical rituals and the dark energy of destruction did not improve the image of the area. Of course, the exploiters and aristocratic parasites were pale from fear when the uprising of Yemelyan Pugachev, another fake pretender to the throne, rocked the empire, but Pugachev lost. Yet even the uprising was clouded in darkest mysteries, foreign espionage and outside interference. We could point fingers, but let's leave it be. There has been more foreign interference in later Russian upheavals. By the beginning of the 19th century, the once cleanest river turned into a putrid sewer. Finally, it began to take revenge on people. The first to feel this revenge were the Sandunovs, the creators of the famous Moscow bath on the banks of the Neglinaya River, and that revenge happened even earlier. However, this story began not in Moscow but in St. Petersburg. At that time, the young beauty Lizaveta Fedorova, who had a magnificent mezzo-soprano, she excelled on the theater stages of the capital. Well, you see, founded by Tsar Peter the Great in 1703, we're talking about St. Petersburg. It became the capital of the Russian Empire for more than 200 years, from 1712 to 1728, and from 1732 to 1918. St. Petersburg ceased being the capital in 1918 after the Russian Revolution of 1917, but of course there was always tension with Moscow, who is the capital and who is not in reality. Anyway, Empress Ekaterina Вторая, Catherine II, liked it so much that the singer was given a distinctive stage name Uranova in honor of the newly discovered planet. Fans swarmed around her, but all of them were wiped out by Vice Chancellor Alexei Bezborodko himself, who set his eyes on Lisa. As for Fyodorova Uranova, she liked her fellow professional, Muscovite, Sila Sandunov more. He came from the Georgian family of Zandukeli and got to be an artist by chance. It is said that being at a performance once and seeing the poor performance of the actors, Sabah, he exclaimed, "Yes, I can play better." Soon the 20-year-old Sila really, against the will of his parents, entered the theater, and thanks to his natural gifts, became an excellent comic actor. 5 years later, Sandunov was invited to play in St. Petersburg, where he met Uranova, and then they fell in love. As for Bezborodko, the rejected courtier, to whom Lisa refused to serve as a kept woman, well, he acted despicably. He achieved the dismissal of Sandunov from the theater. In response to this, Sila Sandunov sang some somewhat seditious verses of his own composition during a farewell benefit on January 10, 1791. It was rather a gesture of despair. But Lisa Uranova decided to go all in. During the next performance, she fell on her knees in front of the Empress with the words, "Mother Tsarina, save me," and handed Empress Katherine a paper with a petition. Everything was resolved as well as possible. The Empress immediately ordered the groom to be returned to the theater and wished to be honorary mother at the wedding. Lisa Uranova was presented with a jewelry box, and Catherine II put her diamond ring on the bride's finger, saying the following words, "Do not give it to anyone except the groom." As for the disgraced vice-chancellor, he, too, seeing the attitude of the empress to the newlyweds, asked Lisa, now Sandunova, to forget the past and accept a diamond necklace. You see how complicated and interesting our empress was? And although they do not teach this in American universities today, she greatly helped the cause of the American Revolution. But as far as I know, American universities nowadays belittle that very revolution and people who gave impetus to the birth of the United States. At the same time, we need to recall, in Catherine's time, not far from the Kuznetsky Bridge over the Neglinka, over that ill-fated river, there was a secret expedition, an institution engaged in the investigation of state crimes. It was led by Stephan Schazkovsky. He was a man of small stature and a puny build. But there were the most terrible legends about his atrocities. Schazkovsky created a system of interrogation with what was termed as partiality. The torture room was equipped with devices, the mere sight of which inspired the defendant with deadly horror and a desire to reveal everything. Schazkovsky's cruelty knew no limits. Here, in a house on the bank of the Neglinka, he personally whipped at least 2,000 people to the point of death. But back to the artists. So, the Sandunovs did not want to wait for the continuation of the intrigues, and having submitted their resignation, they left for Moscow. Here Sila came up with the idea to buy a plot of land on Neglinka and build baths. As for his wife, she was categorically against this step. Deciding to find out about the result of the enterprise started by her husband, Lisa visited a famous Moscow fortune teller. Spreading out the cards, the fortune teller told her, "These places are terrible. There's blood on them. The river will separate you. But I see that you have a strong talisman on your finger. Do not part with it." Elizabeth told her husband everything word for word, but he was adamant. And for those who do not know, a talisman is a lucky charm. The construction of the baths turned out to be really difficult. The Bezboroddkov diamonds were first to be invested into this enterprise. When the Muscovites found out about this, a rumor about this young wife began to swirl around the first capital. This is how we call Moscow, as contrasted with St. Petersburg. We also call it the White Stone City. But back to the real estate development. The Muscovites talked about among themselves, clearly implying that for opera aria singers, diamonds are not just given just like that, you know. The Sandunovs, in order to extinguish the gossip, even had to donate part of the diamonds to the orphanage. As a result, there were not enough funds. Then Sila approached his wife with a demand to give the empress a casket and a diamond ring to the good cause of real estate development and resulting urban beautification. Lisa replied that the box and the ring were her property and had nothing to do with Sila. Enraged, Sandunov grabbed his wife and threw her away from him in a fit of rage. "And what did the Mother Queen tell you? You can give the ring only to me." Without saying a word, Lisa took the ring off her finger and threw it in her husband's face. The next morning, she departed for St. Petersburg. So the fortune teller's prophecy came true. Sila Sandunov was married to the Bass, and with maniacal persistence was engaged in their construction and decoration until his death, which followed in 1820. The Bass really became an ornament of Moscow and still bear the name of their founder. By the way, the Bass of Sila Sandunov did not suffer in the year of the French invasion, 1812, during which the river took in hundreds of new victims. After the expulsion of Napoleon from Russia, a special commission for restoration was created in Moscow. So in 1819, 1822, the Alexander Garden was laid out on the site of the Neglina River, and now enclosed in a pipe and taken underground. Thus, the Alexander Garden, with a total area of about 10 hectares, stretched over the mouth of the buried river. In total, a 3-kilometer stretch of the river from the mouth to the Trubnaya Square was enclosed in a pipe and driven underground. The remaining 4.5 kilometers were taken underground in later years. Imprisoned in the dungeons by sewage and human malice, the river continued to take revenge on its destroyers. Here is how the famous journalist and writer Vladimir Gelerovsky described the rampage of the underground river, overflowing with storm water. The beer hall on Neglina is filled with people who do not want to get wet when the rain begins. The barman is happy. The rain has driven people inside. Employees rush around with mugs and bottles, happy faces, drinking and talking. And suddenly waves of muddy water poured over the threshold like a waterfall. Someone is climbing on the table. Chairs pop up. The owner is waist deep in water, rescues the cash register. The water comes and comes. Horror on their faces. Frantic shouts could be heard through the window. "Save me!" Someone was drowning. This Neglinka could not contain the huge mass of water. As to what was happening underground, Gelerovsky described the story described this in a story, Half an Hour in the Catacombs, which was included in the first book, Slum People. In 1887, the Tsarist censorship arrested the book that had not yet been bound and ordered the entire circulation to be burned. So the story was first published in 1957, 70 years after the destruction of the book. The floods described by Galerovsky also happened in the 20th century, in the mid-1960s and also in August of 1973. They say that an old diamond ring was found in the garbage taken out of the collector during one of the rampages of the river. According to legend, it was Sila Sandunov, mourning his broken love, that threw Liza's ring into the Neglinka, which became a river of discord. Nowadays, diamond rings are not thrown into the river. But for those Russians and foreigners who visit antique shops and auctions, I would advise them to think 100 times before buying jewelry with a pedigree. What if this thing is washed not only by the tears and blood of the owner or his wife, but also bears the evil fate of the river, buried alive under the white stone First Capital? As we already know, even in the middle of the 18th century, the waters of Neglina River were heavily polluted as they were used as a waste drain for the needs of the rapidly growing population of Moscow. And aristocratic parasites engaged in unchecked real estate development, as well as the advancing industry used the river for its own needs, as we can attest to looking in our countries all over the globe today. So it was decided at the very top of the Russian government, and by no other than the crowned environmentalist, it was decided to lower part of the ponds. It should be added that the Neglina River overflowed in high water and flooded the neighboring streets. Therefore, by 1775, Katherine II had drawn up a project in which it was ordered to turn Neglina into an open canal with boulevards for walking along the banks. Listen, 3 centuries ago, it was impossible to imagine Moscow without the Neglina River. But the city developed rapidly, and by the end of the 18th century, the river turned into a gutter. So the empress tried to improve it. Look, ponds appeared on the side of the Tsvetnoy Boulevard and along the entire length of the current Neglina Street. The riverbed was straightened and stone embankments were built. But this did not save from the smells of sewage, and they decided to chain the foul river in a pipe. This was done in 1819, just during the mass reconstruction of Moscow, during the restoration after the fire of 1812, caused by foreign invaders from France. However, the open canal, which smelled of sewage throughout its entire length, did not contribute to the improving the atmosphere in the capital. So it was decided to fill it up. Having previously blocked it with arches, military engineers took over the construction of the underground bed, and under capable leadership, by 1819, part of the Neglina from Sabah Marozov Street to the mouth was enclosed in a pipe, which was a 3-kilometer brick vault, and the banks of the former canal turned into Neglina Street. Half a century later, the Neglina collector stopped coping with the flow of water. During heavy floods and heavy rains, the river broke through to the surface. The situation was complicated by the owners of neighboring buildings, houses, who arranged homemade plumbing tie-ins through which sewage was dumped into the river. So in 1886-87, a major repair of the underground canal was carried out. The tunnel was divided into 3 sections, and from the years of 1910 to 1914, a section of the Neglinka collector was built under the theater square. This tunnel, with a length of exactly 117 meters, passes next to the Hotel Metropole and the Malay Theater. Now it is called in the honor of its creator, Schazkovsky Tunnel, and illegal tours along the Neglinka are usually conducted here. Despite the construction of more and more sewers, flooding did not stop. In the mid-1960s, the Neglinka broke out to the surface again and flooded some streets so much that it was necessary to move along them by boat. When in the early 1970s the collector was updated and significantly expanded from Trubnaya Square to the Hotel Metropole, the flooding finally stopped. You can check it yourself when you visit the third Rome, that is Moscow. But there is more to this hotel, and I must share the story. When the legendary Sandunov baths appeared on the Neglina, they decided to take water for baths from the Moskva River and drain the dirty water into the Neglinka. At the same time, a market appeared on Trubnaya Square, which got its name from the pipe in which the Neglinka was removed to, where stolen goods were sold on that market. The environment was appropriate: slums, thieves' dens, and prostitutes. On the corner of Trubnaya, there were famous taverns. Their names in English were Hell and Crimea. The restaurant Crimea occupied 2 floors. Card sharks and scammers entertained on one of them. The second was decorated brightly with a pretension to chic, and merchants and visitors were feasting there. And below, deep in the basement, there was another tavern. This place was called briefly and ominously Hell. It was here that the entire criminal world of Moscow flocked to. If Crimea was noisy, humming, playing and singing on Trubnaya Square, then Hell was ominously silent. Not a single sound came from out of its dungeon to the street. One entrance here led from Tsvetnoy Boulevard, the other from Grachovka, as Trubnaya Street was formerly called, running parallel to the boulevard. In the general huge hall of that Hell, on one half of it, hundreds of people were sitting at tables. In the middle of it, hot dishes were being fried and cooked on a huge stove. The buffet was filled with bottles of alcohol. There was silence behind the buffet. There was a game of the now forgotten strap, that was the name of it, and also the same type of the resilient thimble, revived by scammers during the years of the recent Russian market freedoms. It was the front part of an underground tavern. The other half was called the underworld. It consisted of corridors and chambers of different sizes. The smaller ones were called infernal forges. The 2 large ones were called devil's mills. The Russian police, the city Moscow police, did not stick their noses in there. No one drank there. The card sharks quietly gambled. There were card games for very big money, and the loot was divided and sold. Orders were executed using false passports and other documents that were in use at the time. According to contemporaries, there were so many corpses dumped into the Neglinka at that time that the stone riverbed was clogged and the water stopped flowing. Look, it's a paradox. Next to the revelry and crime, a political event took place in the underground hall on the Trubnaya Square. Shaggy-haired students of the Moscow University and the Petrovsky Academy descended into Hell. They sang Russian folk song Dubinushka, and they enjoyed the respect of tramps and bouncers. The students were not limited to singing. The history of the first attempt on life of Emperor Alexander II on April 4, 1866 is connected with that Hell Tavern, because meetings were held here, at which during the meetings there was a plan made for the attempt on the Tsar. It was developed and thought out in that place. For secret meetings, the students chose the most convenient place without risking meeting the police. As you can see, universities at the time were not brighter than universities today. Anyway, members of the secret revolutionary society, called the organization, created and led by student of Moscow University, Nikolai Ishutin, they gathered into that hell. This hereditary honorary citizen of Moscow, the predecessor of the Bolsheviks, he professed the principle, the end justifies the means. The goal was declared to be a peasant revolution, the propaganda of socialism and seizure of power for transfer to the people. They were not groundless dreamers. They had international ties and were well organized. And they aimed to kill the emperor, the Russian emperor, who brought real freedoms to his country and real reforms, who was probably the best emperor Russia ever had. Those who were initiated into this sinister plan formed a narrow secret group called Hell. They borrowed the name from the tavern. Nikolai Ishutin's cousin, Dmitry Karakozov, a student at the Moscow University, went to St. Petersburg along the way scattering leaflets to friends of the workers, calling on them to rise up after the assassination of the Tsar. As the gates of the summer garden, at the gates there, the revolutionary fired at Emperor Alexander II and missed, for which he was tried and hanged. Nikolai Ishutin, who was sentenced to life in prison, went insane. Such a terrible story was connected to the Trubnaya Square. And other events relate to the river flowing under it in the life of the great journalist and the poet whom I already mentioned, Gilerovsky. After reading about the underground sewers of Paris in Victor Hugo's novel Les Miserables, the young Gilerovsky decided to walk along the riverbed accompanied by the plumber Fedya and described the Moscow sewer. They went down into the well. Equipped with hunting boots, the desperate newspaperman stepped into the cold waters, and he went stubbornly forward. With the help of a light bulb, he examined the walls of the dungeon, damp, covered with thick slime. They walked for a long time, sometimes sinking into deep ooze or into impassable, putrid liquid mud. In some places, bending down, since the mud drifts were so high that it was just impossible to walk straight, he had to bend down. And yet, at the same time, Gilerovsky reached the vault with his head and shoulders. His feet sank into the mud, sometimes bumping into something dense. Fedya said that he was right. They walked on people. A week after the trip, the author of The Mystery of Neglinka, publications in the newspaper, came to his senses. He went to the bath and cut his hair bald. The Moscow City Duma or Council drew attention to the journalist's speech and allocated money to rebuild the Neglinka and clear the riverbed of dirt. This happened in 1886. According to Gilerovsky, the mud was the main cause of floods. Even after the reconstruction and cleaning, the elements regularly caused a lot of troubles to the city. Trubnaya Square and the Negliny passage almost to the Kuznetsky Bridge were flooded with every downpour, so that the water gushed like a waterfall into the doors of shops and into the lower floors of this area. On Trubnaya Square, in March of 1953, there was a monstrous, horrible stampede in the crowd moving to the Hall of Columns of the House of Unions to say goodbye to Stalin. A lot of people died then, a lot. The communist dictator died and took many people with him, those who came to mourn him. Well, there's another story connected to the river. Sabah Marozov was a famous Russian industrialist and theatrical patron, one of those naive, wealthy sponsors of the Bolsheviks, the communists who laid waste to the Russian Empire and created the USSR. He helped people like Stalin at the end. Of course, such naive sponsors of bloody revolutions are found not only in Russia. Sabah Marozov's mistress, a French woman named Juju, worked as a model in one of the capital's fashion houses. Her carriage was driving along the Kuznetsky bridge when a newsboy shouted, "Sabah Marozov committed suicide in Nice. Sabah Marozov committed suicide in Nice." Juju ordered the driver to stop to buy the newspaper. She barely managed to jump off the running board. Well, Juju did not notice carriage rushing towards her. The coachman did not have time to restrain the horses. The girl was taken to the hospital. Doctors fought for her life for a long time, but they could not save her. And after the sunset, in a doorway near Kuznetsky Bridge, a random passerby came across the body of a boy who was selling newspapers in the morning. A passerby peered into his face. The boy was dead. A silk stocking squeezed his neck with superhuman force. The same night, the police examination established that the stocking belonged to a French woman, whose body had been lying in the morgue for several hours by the time of the death of the newspaper boy. The fame of that Neglinka did not confuse the patron named Sabah Marozov, did not scare him, I should say. A successful manufacturer began the construction of the Metropole, the best hotel in Moscow, right above Neglinka. His new project was amazing in its boldness and scope. In the midst of construction, Marozov was arrested and put on trial. He was accused of abuse and embezzlement. After a very painful trial, the jury acquitted Marozov. But by this time, through the efforts of officials, he was completely ruined and deprived of the opportunity to implement his grandiose project. A year later, the hotel was still built, but just a few months after the opening, a terrible tragedy happened. The hotel was built and part of the room stock has already been used. Guests have settled there, but suddenly there was a fire, and for unknown reasons, the building burned out completely in just a few hours. After that, the authorities began repair work in the underground pipe of Neglinka. Some sections of the pipe were restored, but this did not stop the river. 40 years, in the mid-1960s, again, it broke out of the stone banks and flooded the center of Moscow. And as I said before, 8 years later, in 1973, history repeated itself. Well, by 1997, the workshop of the artist and sculptor Zurab Tsereteli completed a project that included the reconstruction of the Neglinka riverbed from the Alexander Garden to the Manezhna Square. This closed-loop reservoir, the flow which is maintained artificially, is not really an attempt to remove a section of the river from the ground, as many Muscovites believe. Now, the imitation of the Neglinka in this place is equipped with fountains and sculptures, but the real Neglinka, now, Muscovites do not have any access to it. To look at the Neglinka, you need to go down into the underground collector, and even then, remember, there's a criminal article for this. So, I do not advise you doing this, unless you want to experience modern Russian prisons. I don't think there's any need to add to ill fame to the Neglinka, so please obey the laws. And I will bring you more stories from very complicated and fascinating Russian history. If you do like my research, I ask that you support it. There are links in the description to this video. Please tell others about my research and about my channel. Please subscribe to it, and thank you for your attention.